Hello, and welcome to the presentation for the UEA Digital Humans entry to the GENEA Challenge 2022. I'd firstly like to introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Windle, a PhD student from the University of East Anglia. This work was a collaboration with David Greenwood, also of UEA, and Sarah Taylor, an independent researcher. I'll begin by defining the aims of our research. Of course, the main aim is to produce competitive gesture generation from speech. However, we also wanted to compare a simple LSTM model with a more complex multi-head decoder system. This is where each head in the model is responsible for decoding motion for a different section of the body. This should form many individual decoders that are experts in their respective body sections. We also aim for models that can adequately condition on a speaker identity, capturing mannerisms in their gesture and overall motion. Perhaps most important to a gesture generation system is the data representation for both speech and body motion. We predict our body motion using the 6 degrees of freedom rotation representation due to its suitability to deep learning tasks. While we don't predict joint positions, we use the world position of a joint as part of a geometric loss, which is achieved during training via forward kinematics. Our speech audio was represented using the problem-agnostic speech embedding referred to as PASE+. The reason for the use of PASE+ is its efficient encoding of multiple speech features. It was created using a multitask learning approach targeting 12 regression tasks. These tasks include estimating commonly used features in speech-to-motion systems such as MFCCs and FBanks, and are therefore implicitly encoded in the embedding. The embedding also includes other useful speech-related features relating to prosody and speech content. For our text representation, we used FastText embeddings. And to represent speaker identity, we use a learned embedding. This is learned during training and acts as a style conditioning variable. We found that due to there only being 17 different speakers, a small embedding size of 2 was adequate to represent speaker styles. So how does all of this data get used? Let's look at our model architectures. Here we have an end-to-end overview of our LSTM baseline. Each data source is converted into its respective representation and then concatenated into a single vector. A red box indicates frozen weights during training. The concatenated data vector is fed into a bidirectional LSTM that feeds into a fully connected linear layer. The model estimates the global position of the body world joint and the 6D representation of all joint rotations in the skeleton topology. Here we have an end-to-end overview of our part-specific decoder model. The encoder portion is similar to that of the LSTM baseline. However, rather than feeding into a linear layer, it is fed into multiple decoding heads. As we can see, each decoder is responsible for decoding a specific section of the body. In this case, the head, torso, hands, and legs separately. Each decoder predicts the 6D rotations for all joints in the respective body section. The leg decoder is the only exception, where it also predicts the global position for the body world joint. When training our models, they were trained using the same procedure. We include a geometric loss to our learning process. We consider y to be our target and y hat to be our prediction, f prime to be the first or second derivative, denoted by the number of dashes. We convert our predicted rotations to positions and compute multiple loss terms. LP is the position loss. LV is the velocity loss, calculated using the first derivative of the positions. LA is the acceleration loss, calculated using the second derivative of the positions. LR is the rotation loss of the 6D rotations. And LO is the loss between body world offsets. Each term is weighted where appropriate, and then we combine these all to form our final loss, LC. We train our LSTM baseline for 300 epochs and our part-specific decoder for 240 using the Adam optimizer. It's also worth mentioning that due to finger motion being absent from many clips, when this is the case, the finger motion is not included in the loss term. This is in hopes to encourage more appropriate finger motion and avoid regressing to the commonly seen static finger pose. Let's have a look at some results. When performing our internal evaluation process, we noticed an occasional issue regarding foot contact. The baseline LSTM model did not suffer with this issue, however, our part-specific model sometimes did. While some predicted leg motion was plausible, we would occasionally observe sequences where both legs would leave the ground at once. We can see an extreme example of this here, which is a shame as the poor leg movement distracts from the upper half of the motion which appeared to be performing well. With this in mind, we submitted the LSTM baseline to the full body tier and the part-specific model to the upper body only tier. Now let's look at some submitted results. Here are 3 examples of the same audio driving the motion from our 2 models. Part-specific decoders on the left and LSTM baseline on the right.
I like country, I like pop, and I just don't like screaming metal, like rah, I don't like that. Do you know what I mean? And she likes having the blankets more, so if I don't have a blanket next to me, she will sit there and whine until I put a blanket out, and then she'll come off. Like, her, actual, human self is, hilarious to me. She just falls places.
So hopefully you can all see that the arm gestures and finger movement is better in the part-specific decoder when compared to the LSTM baseline. Now let's compare the impact of a speaker embedding by showing 2 clips of the same audio with a different speaker identity provided. The example shows one speaker that is very active with their movement and gestures versus a speaker that is still gesturing but in a more restrained manner.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's funny because the doctors are scanning the patients, and that's not real. It's just funny, watching them. I don't know, funny.
So how did we perform in the user study results? Both proposed models performed in a similar middle-of-the-pack position when compared to all other systems when considering human likeness. While we can't compare the results of each model directly, we can compare the performance with their respective ground truth ratings. The LSTM baseline is an average of 32 points lower than the full body ground truth, whereas the part-specific decoder is only 22 points lower than the upper body ground truth. This could suggest that the part-specific decoder model may produce motion that is closer in human likeness to the ground truth than the LSTM baseline. If we view the distribution and responses of the appropriateness study, the LSTM baseline remained in a similar middle-of-the-pack position. However, the part-specific model improves to gain the second highest appropriateness score when comparing only submitted systems. While we cannot draw statistical significance against any other submissions, this appropriateness rating is still promising. It is not possible to derive the reason for this performance gain from the user study alone. However, through visual inspection, we observed that the arm gestures produced from this model would start at the expected time in relation to speech, and the gesture intensity appeared to match the appropriate amount too, particularly when compared to the LSTM model. Let's discuss the limitations. We observed some unconstrained motion. This was present in both trained models, but was slightly more prevalent in the LSTM baseline. As we can see in this example, the body appears to be slightly unnatural position at the start. When looking at animation curves, we found this was due to some joints exceeding their typical rotation values and was quite often observed in the shoulder. We believe this may be due to the position loss value being weighted too heavily. Despite the joints producing physically impossible rotations, if we apply forward kinematics, the absolute positions, particularly in the end effectors, are seemingly plausible. This over-rotation was often temporary, and this clip has shown can resolve itself after some number of frames. So to wrap up, we have highlighted limitations in our work as leg motion, particularly in the part-specific model, is underperforming compared to the upper body. We speculate that this may be due to a weak correlation between speech and leg motion. Leg motion likely depends on the motion of the rest of the body more than what is being said at the time. This means that when the rest of the body and the legs are decoded individually, it creates a bit of a disparity between the leg motion and the rest of the body. Unfortunately, without an entry in both tiers, it is not possible to draw exact comparisons and improvements from one model over the other. We have provided our observed evidence that the part-specific decoder improves the upper body motion to the LSTM baseline, but in future work it would be nice to provide a more definitive measure of this from a user study directly comparing the two. Both models scored lower on the human likeness scores than appropriateness, where we found the part-specific decoder performed very well. This is likely due to over-rotations earlier described. More experiments are needed to determine if this could be mitigated from the introduction of constraints to the joint rotations, which could also be learned from the data on a per-speaker basis. Thank you for your time, and of course, thank you to the organisers for bringing this challenge together. It has been a great experience and your efforts are much appreciated. I'll take any questions now, but also feel free to contact me via email or on Twitter.